Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about Season 7, Episode 9 of Riverdale. A lot of really interesting things went down in this episode, so let's break it down. So obviously this episode mainly focuses on Betty and Veronica, and we're going to break it down story by story. So first and foremost, let's start off with Betty's side of things. Obviously, she's had her continuous meetings with Dr. Werther's, and I was kind of scared that eventually her circumstances, I thought the long end of it was going to end up ending with her ending up at the Sisters of Quiet Mercy, because, well, that's where Polly ended up. So I thought that was going to be like the parallel they made here, especially because like Ethel's already there because of like the quote unquote murder of her parents and everything. So I thought kind of a similar thing was going to happen there. But especially it is this thing where like Dr. Werther's is trying to understand about Betty. You know, it's like, oh, like how often do you have these fantasies about sex? You know, and it's not just about Archie, it's about Jughead, Fangs, Reggie, and even Veronica, because for her it's about understanding, because it is such a taboo thing. And obviously sex is just a beautiful thing. It is that thing of like, yes, as long as you're safe about it, it should be fine. Obviously you have to like understand like the choices and understanding all of that. There's it's about sexual education, which is not something even the school systems are good at, because I only had one sex ed class, and that was ninth grade of my freshman year. That's where you kind of saw like babies being born for the first time, like like old school, like videos from like the 70s and 80s. And I remember that. But that was it. And now even that for me was one semester in my freshman year of high school. And obviously for me, that was like, 18 years ago at this point in time, something like that. So yeah, this country doesn't. I mean, once again, the U.S. in general does not handle sex well. We're one of those weird countries in that regard. That's always kind of been kind of one of the knocks against this country in that regard. But it's like, once again, it's about sexual education, and that's something her mom isn't even willing to open that door. I mean, it's at a time frame where it's like, right, girls are supposed to be kind of almost meek and modest, and anything other than that, like, oh, you're an exhibitionist, you're this, you're that. You know, I think it almost ties into what was Betty known as. It's like, oh yeah, she was like known as like the harlot of, like the harlot of Babylon. She was like the harlot of Riverdale type of situation. So it's almost like, I think it's meant to kind of play into that same theme, but it's like, yeah, she's she's just curious, and that's at this point in time, a woman being curious. Oh, no, we can't have that. So she's kind of stuck in this rock and this hard place in that regard, especially with Dr. Weathers legitimately gaslighting him and her mom gaslighting her. Obviously the term and phrasing of gaslighting in the capacity that we use it today did not exist in that. But it's like, she's straight up being gaslit. And Veronica's story is all about gaslighting as well. But either way, she opens up to him because, hey, you are a therapist, so I am going to talk to you about certain things. It's like, oh, this book says, hey, teenagers think about sex like every 7 seconds. But it's like, no, that's teenage boys. The numbers for girls is different. But it's like, right, fine. What is the number you want me to say? And she's like, yeah, I think about sex like all the time. Because she even brought up like school. You literally pack a school full of horny teenagers. What do you expect? It's not like she's the only one kind of dabbling in that. She's just the only one you're making an example of, because it's like, sadly, I mean, luckily Cheryl and Kevin's circumstances are so low key because they'd sadly be in that same range as well. Obviously you have Fangs and Mitch, because Mitch is pregnant, so no one knows about that. But it's like, yeah, Betty's the one that's being isolated because she's the one trying to be free thinking. She wants to, like she did everything she did showing her underwear on live television because she was trying to, like, her parents were being very oppressive and making her do something she didn't want to do, making her feel like something was wrong with her for feeling the way she did. Like, once again, like Veronica's in the same boat, like Veronica's kind of got that sexual liberation about her as well. Like she's free forming when it comes to like glove and stuff like that, but the hammer's coming so hard on Betty. And so every little thing she brings up with Werther's, whether it's about like, oh, I might not even want to get married one day, and even talking about her fantasy and her desires and her dreams about, like, obviously more often than not it's with Archie, but kind of having a situation, the classic sexual fantasy, which I think we never really get it from the female perspective, which is kind of interesting. It's always like, it's the cliche, like, classic male fantasy of, like, the teacher fan, like, oh, like, which, let's not get it twisted, it's a really good one. You can't beat a classic. It's a really good fantasy. Yeah, there is something about, like, kind of, especially kind of like, oh, someone kind of like, even if they're the same age, dressed like that in this very, like, professional sense, and especially with the top unbuttoned, like, it's a whole thing, right? So, like I said, it's just interesting because we never get that female perspective. It's always seen as kind of, like I said, the cliche, stereotypical male fantasy, never like the female fantasy as well, which I think is interesting. And she talked about, like, oh, the dream always ends up at the same point and she's being watched. And it's like, oh, so, like, like, you're kind of a voyeur type of situation. But it's like, no, it's a larger conversation about her feeling like, for her, like, what these dreams represent. It makes her feel like she wants to be seen because she's never been seen before, like, in so many aspects of her life. So that's, being able to be seen of, like, yes, I have my desires, my own independent thought, my own self-determination of who I want to be. I don't want to just get married and have kids. Maybe I'll have kids, maybe get married and have kids one day, maybe not. But I want to be able to contribute more to the world than rather than just being put in this box of what I'm supposed to be as a young lady and eventually as a woman, of, like, oh yeah, falling into the the stereotypical gender roles type of situation. And so I thought that was so interesting. And obviously like I said, every conversation they have ends up going back to Alice. So when she says, I don't know if I'm gonna get married, Alice brings a whole bunch of wedding magazines and, like, oh, you going down to Iowa would be like the greatest day of my life. Then the moment she started talking about the stuff that was in her diary, her mom breaks into her room, reads her diary, even brings a priest over to take her confession, and, oh, exorcise you, perform an exorcism if needed. It's like, Alice, do you not realize how crazy you sound? But that's the sad thing. There probably was a lot of that going on at that time. And it's easy to, say that now, obviously viewing it from 2023 lens, when back then that probably was not, it didn't necessarily have to be commonplace, but maybe it was common enough. So either way, I thought that was just so interesting. And Betty was like, okay, you want to play that game? Bet. Because it's like, I'm going to find out what Dr. Withers is constantly scribbling in his, because it seemed like a lot of her conversations that she was having with Withers, he was he was still trying to push his narrative, but at the same time, it did seem like he was captivated by what she was saying, because, like, the fact is that she was saying something so well, like, that shows you, like, her mindset, that it wasn't like coming, like, this is something she had thought out. She's, like, developing this, like, figuring herself out as she's talking with you, which is a good thing. That's the point of therapy, to figuring out, like, what's at the heart of everything. But it's like, no, the point of this therapy was to fix her in the regards of, like, you are broken, when in actuality there's nothing wrong, but maybe we can help you with it's about identity for Betty, and try to find her identity, find her independence in an era where independent women is not a good thing. So I think that's so interesting. But yeah, she breaks into Werther's drawer and finds a book called Lolita, which I'm hearing that name, I'm like, oh, I kind of have an idea what that's about. And it's about a teacher being kind of like into, like, a young student, like young, and you're like, okay, that's disgusting. And for him, he justified by being like, oh, it's a book I'm reading to learn about your situation, Betty, and trying to fix you. She's like, no. This character, Lolita, isn't some sex-craved character. Like, let's be frank, isn't this sex-craved child, because that's what she is. She's a child because the character's 12 years old. It's about some sex-crazed teacher obsessed with her, and Betty starts making direct parallels to her and Worthington. It's like, you take all those notes about me and all the stuff I do, and we talk about stuff that shouldn't. This is super inappropriate. Like, if this was in a professional sense, I was older, sure, but for one, it's supposed to be like, hey, we're able to talk about this doctor-patient confidentiality type of situation. Like, regardless of your age, that is still in play. But he's running, because the era, they're kind of playing fast and loose with that rule. And while he's, like, going back to Alice and telling her all of this. So Betty's like, I'm not going to, like, ever come to sessions with you anymore, because I don't feel comfortable, because because you reading this book is because you have some sycophant self-gratification you're getting from it, because you're trying to paint me as Lolita, the sex craved person, but you are the actual sex craved person in the story, because that speaks volumes of that's how he chooses to read that side of the story. But this is how I do believe Betty's perception of it is the real reality of it. So yeah, but Alice doesn't gets to call hey, Dr. Werther's doesn't want to do the therapy anymore, and because he also doesn't want to get exposed for what he's reading and stuff like that. It is that thing of once again, the people who act holier than thou, and that ends up being the biggest hypocrite. Someone that's oh, I'm against this thing, and it's just yeah, but you got some skeletons in your closet as well, type of thing. So it's now it makes sense why Werther's is all about oh, what's right, and being kind of the one who determines what's right, because he's overcompensating for the fact is of you are kind of a shitty person, it seems. But either way, it does lead to this confrontation between Betty and Alice, where Betty's talking to her mom of our relationship wasn't always like this. Stop playing telephone without the Werthers and just talk to me. Our relationship was good, but it just seems that at some point you just flipped a switch. That the fact is that you want to protect me and everything from the world, but because you were kind of afraid for me, but now it feels like you're afraid of me, and I want to understand why. And before Alice could say anything, Hal shows up. Now this starts opening up a whole bunch of questions. We know who Hal was in the original timeline, and maybe he's not the serial killer he was, but maybe he's still not a good person. And so he's trying to put this all on Betty. It's I've heard everything that you've said. Your mother has sacrificed for you. And Betty's in what way? Tell me. And so that made me go, are we dealing with the Charles storyline? Did she have maybe an abortion, or maybe she just lost Charles in this timeline, and that is something she's dealing with, so she's overcompensating by trying to be overprotective of Betty, because her child was taken from her. She doesn't want the same thing to happen. So, or maybe something terrible happened to her at a young age, and she's overcompensating and trying to protect Betty. It does seem yes, it's misguided, but it does seem like there is some love, but she's kind of overcompensating and turning into an absolute oppressive control freak over Betty. And it seems like Hal is there to try and I don't know, but the moment Hal showed up is when she shut down again, because Betty was I want to know why you're unhappy, Mom. And she's oh, you think you know? And I was yes, because I won't know until you talk to me about everything. Let's sit out and talk. But the next day, Betty wants to talk to her mom. Her mom's oh yeah, you think you know everything? Fine. No more supporting you. Fix your own damn breakfast. I'm no longer your mother. I was halfway expecting her to either send Betty off to Sisters of Quiet Mercy, or at the very least kick her out of the house type of situation. So once again, see how so much, because it's just been one thing after another in in Alice's eyes. It's nothing I do, all that I've done for you, all that I've sacrificed, but it's she's not willing to take the time. It's not easy. It's not the easiest thing. I get it. Right, you're the adult in the situation. What I say goes, and when you have a rambunctious kid that won't listen, but that's the problem. Your child wants to listen this time. It is this thing where I think, and I can't preach as I'm a parent, but I've had to do this as I've gotten older when it comes to my nieces and nephew. I have to take a step back and try and listen and hear and see things from their purview, because hey, I was your age one point in time, so I know what it's like to be an awkward teenager dealing with some of the stuff that you might be dealing with, and I won't get into anything personal because it's family business, but I'm trying to it is that thing of, I think Alice could do that. I think it is a thing of, once again, I do believe it does come from a good place, but it's being misguided and contorted. And whether that's just on Alice or whatever she's dealing with, that she's kind of projecting onto Betty, or whether it's something Hal related. Once again, I don't know if he's a monster or a deviant in this world like he was in the original. We'll have to wait and see, but that's where things have kind of left off for Betty. So we swing over to Veronica's side of things. She's trying to get the Babylonium swinging and get, obviously, it was already in trouble before she bought it, but she's trying to, raise it up, giving out free tickets, but obviously bringing up what is something I never knew until I got older, which is a very, very true thing. A great place to hear someone talk about that is Kevin Smith. He is someone who runs a movie theater now, and so, he is very frank about it on Fat Man Beyond, about some of the behind the scenes stuff, but also right, you don't make much money, if any, off the movies you have in your that you play, because most of that movie goes back to the studios. The theater makes its money on the concession stand, so like the popcorn, the sodas, all that is where they make their money. That's why Veronica was like, hey, give out these free tickets, get everyone coming here for this Jimmy Dean double feature, and we'll make money on the concessions. But that blew up in her face when it turns out that the reels were overexposed, and she went to go talk to one of the studios guy, the main studio guy, Peter. Well, Peter was like not listening to her because, hey, you're a small business, because it turns out a multitude of things. One, a lot of people are looking down on her because she's such a young, I mean, for one, you being a woman is not going to be easy for you. Two, you're a teenager, that's going to make them look down on you even more. But three, the real main heart of it all is they all want good relations with her parents, and her parents are sabotaging her at every step of the way. Because they, like, the fact is they're kind of in the same regard where it's just kind of like in their case, it's even worse. At least Alice is there in her daughter's life. Like, once again, misguided as it may be, like, she's at least there. You guys sent your daughter away from you to do whatever to kind of teach her a lesson. And now she is trying to be a successful business person because she, like, usurped their deal and made, it's like, oh, like, here's our child being rebellious again. It's time for us to put her in her place. And for her, it's just like, this is my family. They want everyone to fail except for them. They want to be the only successful one, which we know that is kind of the Lodge way to, like, kind of scorch earth everything else and then rebuild on top of, like, all that scorched earth and benefit from it. So, you know, I mean, that's definitely like a Hiram thing. Hermione can be like that as well, as we've seen, but that's why they're a complicated match made in heaven in some capacities and in some regards. But yeah. So none of the major studios are willing to help her with the movie situation. Like, it's not even just about the James Dean movie anymore. It's about trying to get this movie or this movie, or a musical or this or that. Every studio won't help her because it would mean being in competition, going against her parents, and they want to be in their good graces and want to do business with them. Well, they decide to start looking for smaller studios to kind of pull movies from. And there was one movie, but it's an okay monster flick that even Jughead is like, yeah, but he uses his example of one director who made okay movies, but he made the experience such a gas that it led to those movies becoming popular. So the invention of, like, 4D is right here, which I've never actually been to a 4D movie. I've heard people talk about it a little bit, like, kind of like that whole 4D experience. And so that's what Veronica's trying to do this time around, is make it kind of like this experience. She hired Archie and Reggie to kind of play the monster. So ultimately, like, you set the scene, got the smoke up, so that, right, they got the 3D glasses on, and then, like, the smoke appears in front of the screen, and here comes Archie and Reggie playing it up, and it ends up being an amazing success because everyone's, like, thrilled and having fun. I love that when she initially brought up the 4D, and it's like, don't you mean 3D? Because obviously Cheryl and Veronica, of course, but I love Dilton being like, oh, the fourth dimension is time. Is time what you're talking about? And then Veronica just looks at Dilton. She's like, shut up, Dilton. And I'm like, oh, poor Dilton. So I love that. So I thought that was pretty dope and interesting. But it does lead to everything being success. Granted, Archie and, like, Reggie have, like, their own things to deal with, so they're like, yeah, we can't really do this as, like, a job. Obviously, like, word of mouth has come out, and, like, obviously it's made the Babylonium a success, to the point that, well, she's just going to get Clay and Kevin to do it. I guess it's like, eventually going to have to find probably some hired hands to kind of do it. She was probably willing to do it on the cheap, but I love that she's like, all right, you want to renegotiate. They're like, it's not even about the money. It's just like, we have other things, and we just don't have time to also do this side gig when we got basketball practice and games. So she's like, right, you're not going to squeeze me. And, like, so I'll get Clay and Kevin to do it. And Archie and Reggie immediately put the conversation down, like, okay, we're fine with that. So it almost seemed like a deal that kind of backfired in her regard. I mean, I wonder, would she even have to necessarily pay them much extra since they're already employees regardless? So she probably just gives them a look. Maybe that counts as a little bit of OT or something. I don't know. So they probably, like they said, they probably get compensated for a little bit, but it's probably not like the full wage that maybe like Archie and Reggie would have potentially got per hour. But either way, I think there's a little bit of that, like, oh, like you kind of overestimate your situation and that kind of blew up in your face. But it's also like, right, you once again, you still have Clay and Kevin, so it all works out. But her success has like, she's not feeling herself because it's like, hey, everything's great. I'm in a situation where my business is more successful. The big studios, the first guy in particular who kind of screwed me over with the James Dean movie, is now crawling back and like, hey, I want to do business with you. So it all works out in the end. Granted, it comes at a setback because now things between her and Reggie, she kind of had him waiting too long. So her successful business, like she kept shooting her shot, and Reggie eventually kept saying yes, but it kept getting postponed because business isn't doing well. Oh, now business is doing too well, so it was just never like, we're at different phases in our life. Like, you're the businesswoman, entrepreneur that you are, and that's kind of getting in the way of like any form of a personal life, which we see is kind of reflective of before. Like, Veronica was all about her business, and obviously her personal life kind of ended up suffering because of that. In many regards, whether it's the Reggie situation or whether it's the Archie thing, and so she kind of was left alone. And it's like, yeah, it's lonely being at the top, you know. So we'll see whether anything kind of comes about the Reggie and her situation going forward. Like, it does seem like he finally gave in, and he does like her, but you know, it's not going to be the easiest thing. Well, much like Betty having her complications, so does Veronica, because it turns out Veronica's parents have kicked her out. It's like, right, since you're financially stable now, since you're such a success, you don't need our support anymore, which means she can't live at the in the home, the penthouse anymore and stuff. So it's like, right, as she kind of says, and it ties into the overarching theme of like the movie and stuff of like, right, an eye for an eye. So she ends up staying at the Babylonia. I was wondering like where she was going to go. Like I said, I was thinking like maybe like if she got kicked out and if Betty got kicked out, then maybe they could move in together type of thing. But it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. But Veronica is enjoying her success, so I think she's in a slightly better situation than Betty, but her circumstances comes with its cons as well. So it's definitely going to be interesting to see where those elements and those storylines go. But then also we have the situation with Jughead. Like, I do think it's so interesting that these other stories intertwine with his, because obviously Betty comes to him about the Lolita book. Veronica came to him about the movie advice. So because he's reading Brad Radberry's like book collection, because for him he's like, this way, by reading all his books, I feel like I'm able to fully embrace my mentor and the person I looked up to, and kind of finally be able to say goodbye to him. And it's not till the very end of the episode, and it ends up being that thing of what time is. Like, because he says, like, yeah, it kind of feels like time can kind of slow down. It feels like a second could feel like eternity. But it is that thing of no matter how slow it is but time is always moving. It doesn't slow down. Like, it can slow down, but it doesn't ever fully slow down for someone, because even if it's slowed down, it is still, even if it feels like it's slowing down, it's always moving. And for him, there's a way of like, yes, I can mourn Brad Radberry without mulling in it, you know, because I don't think I'll ever be fully done mourning losing like a dear friend like that. But at the end of the day, the life moves on, and you know, you have to find a way to move forward, and he's willing to try and find his way forward by, you know, saying goodbye, and, you know, I guess kind of continuing what the chances and opportunities that Brad has kind of set up for him. So like, I got to move on with my life. But just when he does, Sheriff Keller shows up and is like, right, we got to solve this. And just as Jughead was like, you know, it's like, right, just when I'm out, they pull me back in. Because I figured out anyone, and I brought this up last episode, Jughead will probably be the one, with a suicide note, if there is one, he'll probably be able to tell, because especially now that he's going through all of Brad's books, he'll probably be able to tell, like, well, this suicide note wasn't written by Mr. Rayberry. Because, once again, all his books' themes were about the changings of the seasons, that time is always moving forward, and kind of finding a way forward with that. And obviously that's a theme that Jughead had to come up with, had to, you know, come to realization this episode, which I guess you could also say it also flows into Betty and Veronica's about kind of the change in the seasons in their respective lives, and kind of trying to find ways forward in their respective situations as well. So, but that's where I get the feeling like that might be the case. Why Keller would come to Jughead if it was just straight up like, he's like, we got to figure this out, we got to solve it. Probably like understand its motivation if he did kill himself, or if there's something else at play here, which we as the audience know there is. So that's definitely going to be interesting to kind of dive into going forward into the next episode. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, Be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.